Oh,
Okay, all right. It says we're live, and I'm really hoping that the audio is working. For those that
well,
tuned in before, I'm so sorry for the technical issues. We are gonna do one quick little tweak here, test the audio, and I'm gonna open one other thing. So forgive us while we reset. You can only plan a few weeks in advance, and something's bound to go wrong. So I apologize for that. But we're back, and oh, I'm gonna go over there
okay,
and try to listen and make sure the audio is working now.
okay, okay. We're hoping that our audio is working now. We're going to do a quick test. So, again, I'm so sorry for that technical difficulty. So, give me just one moment. Okay, I think we're good. So, again, I apologize. I'm not 100% sure what happened. I'm hoping that you guys find this stream. I'm definitely learning as we go out some of these things. So let's go ahead and get. Okay. All right. So sorry about that. I think we should be working now.
Yeah, it sounded good when I tested it.
Okay, good. That. Do you know how to pull up the chat though?
Nope.
Okay.
But I will watch it on my phone.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, we're just going to reset a little bit. Hi, everybody. My name is Emily Hall. I'm coming to you live from Glover Nursery. We're in the garden on this beautiful spring day, and we're here to talk all about soils. So if you have any questions while we're going, feel free to go ahead, pop them in the chat. I'll do my best to pay attention as I'm kind of switching back and forth between a couple different screens to get to them as soon as I can. So like I said, today we're talking all about soils, soil health, and Utah soils. So, my first question, what is soil? I feel like a lot of people, we'll call it, I hear dirt all the time, but dirt is different than soil. Dirt is what is on the ground inside your house. Soil is outside, what we plant in. So, soil is a mixture of minerals, organic matter, water, and air. Those air pockets are really important for creating texture and helping with compaction, everything like that. So, soil supports plant growth, water filtration, and carbon storage. It is over when you kind of take into the whole account of the Earth's makeup, the topsoil is a very, very thin layer, and that is what supports all of the life on Earth. So our soil is very important. It's very important to take care of it and know a little bit more about it. So soils take thousands of years to develop. It's formed through weathering of the parent material, and it's influenced by a lot of factors like organisms, climate, topography, time, and of course, human activity. Over time, the soil will develop distinctive layers called horizons, and they have unique characteristics. So, humans ourselves, we don't live long enough to make a measurable positive impact upon soil texture and makeup. So, anything we do over the geological time span, it's pretty small scale and short lived. However, destroying soil can happen much, much faster and can take that much longer over the geological time span to change and correct. So, just a fun little example, the city of Toronto, it has lime-based soils. So it's not too different than us, which means it's quite alkaline. They have had acid rain that has a pH of about 4. So it's very acidic, and again, remember, it's very alkaline. They've had this rain for the past 100 years. It's been measured and tracked. and the pH of their soil is still the exact same that it was 100 years ago. So again, anything that we do is pretty fleeting in that whole geological time scale. So like I said, it's very alkaline, and for 100 years it's been having acid rain and it hasn't changed a thing. So I think that's kind of crazy. So just a little food for thought. All right, I want to talk more about the soil layers or the horizons. So the one that can be, there's technically two that could be on top. I'm going to talk about the O horizon first. That is going to be the organic material. So that's leaves, decomposed plants, all that kind of stuff. However, in Utah, we really don't have much of that O horizon layer because we have such low vegetative cover and a very arid climate. So we mainly just have the A horizon, which is the topsoil. So that's what's rich in nutrients and that's what's best for the plant growth. So the topsoil, the A horizon, and the O horizon are the ones we are most concerned about most of the time. We also have the B horizon, that's the subsoil. So that's less of the organic materials, more into the minerals. And then the C horizon, that's going to be the parent material. So that's the weathered rock. And again, what the parent material is, that's what it's like what the base material is. And that's what gets weathered over time and contributes to what your soil is like. Okay, we are going to talk about soil texture and how that affects plant growth. So your soil texture is one of the first, it's the very first thing that you want to determine when you are examining your soil. This is what is the most determined by weathering and the parent material. So what determines your soil texture is the combination of sand, silt, and clay. Sand is going to be the biggest particle size, silt is medium particle size, and clay is the smallest particle size. So just the texture of the soil can have a really big impact on your plants and your growing. So a sandy soil, it's going to drain relatively quickly, right? It's runs through pretty fast. But because of that, it's going to have low nutrients. It's not able to hold on to those nutrients as much because it's just washing out. There's nothing there that those nutrients can really grab onto and hang around in the soil for a while. So on the other end of the spectrum is like a very clay soil. So that holds water and nutrients very easily, very readily. It's sometimes then on the other hand, it can be dense and then it can be a little hard when it's dry. And because of the size of those particles, they're the smallest size. It can be compacted very easily because it doesn't have a lot of those. It's called like macro and micro pores because they're so much smaller than other textures. It's really easy to compact the soil and get rid of those pores, and then it makes it, more dense. It's harder for the water to drain through, so then you get standing water, and that can kind of lead to a whole other host of problems. So I think one of the biggest examples that we see on a daily basis of like soil compaction with our clay soils is when we have equipment that's used to build houses. So that equipment is very heavy and it's driving all over the soil. And a lot of the times, the soil can be very wet as well. And when it's wet, it's going to compact that much more. So I think that's something that is probably one of the biggest contributing factors to compaction in our suburban areas. And then loam is another one of the soil textures. And this is kind of the most balanced texture. It's the best of all three of the materials together. It's very balanced, holds nutrients and water, but also has that drainage. So let's talk about how you're going to figure out what your soil texture is. One of the most accurate ways to figure out your soil texture is going to be by doing like a soil test that you send off to a soil lab. So in our area, we have the USU Analytical Lab. So they have a soil test that you can, so what you do is it's called a composite soil sample. So you kind of take a little bit of samples from a couple different areas in your, if you're doing like a planting bed or if you've got an orchard or your lawn. So you take a couple different samples from that area, you blend it all together, and then you mail it up to the analytics lab, and then they do all their tests. They don't just do texture, they also will do like nutrients and kind of other just factors of what your soil is. What's really nice is they can also give you some recommendations for what to do for your soil if you're trying to do a certain thing. So another way to determine texture that I want to talk about is it's called texture by feel. So this is it's like a very quick like field test to determine your soil texture. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate it now. I wonder if there's a way. Oh, okay. I think we're having an issue with our comments, so let's see if we can fix that real quick.
I don't want to end it, but I just want to see if there's a way to adjust that while you're pressing.
Okay.
So I think what we'll have to do, and again, I'm so sorry everyone, what we'll have to do is at the end of the video when we can go in and edit the settings, we'll make sure you can post comments, and then we'll monitor those comments and we'll get back to you with the answers if she doesn't address your question during the rest of her presentation. And we'll
Perfect. Sounds good.
We'll fix the text for our next class so that doesn't happen.
Okay, thank you, Regan. Okay, so yeah, so again, so sorry about the technical difficulties we've had on this one. Again, if you have questions that I don't answer by the end, we'll post this video. Please feel free to comment. I'll keep an eye on it, and we'll get those questions answered for you. Okay, let me get all my materials together. Okay, so again, this is just called texture by feel. Pretty quick. You can do it like out in the field. All you need is a little bit of soil and some water. So I have some soil that I took out of my brother's his backyard where we're going to be growing some stuff. He actually lives really close to the nursery. I'm not really sure if it's very representative of West Jordan because I know the history of the area. A lot of like compost was brought in, but I think it's still really interesting to figure out your texture before you kind of do a lot of, like I said, we're doing a lot of planting this year. So I think it's going to be really interesting to determine what that texture is and see how that affects our planting that we do. Okay, so the first step is you want to get like a really good, it says like a heaping tablespoon of soil in the palm of your hand. I am trying to pull out some of this like organic matter. So I've got like some wood chips and stuff in here. I'm trying to pull out just as much of it as I can, or if there's some big rocks or anything like that. Okay, and then just a little bit at a time, we're gonna pour some water onto our soil and we're gonna start kneading it. The main thing that we wanna do is we're trying to moisten the whole thing, and then what we want to do is start kneading it to break up those aggregates so that it kind of gets mixed together. As you can see, this soil it's very dark, which to me is an indicator of a lot of organic material. Okay, so I'm kneading it together. It's coming together. It says like the proper consistency when moldable is like a moist putty. So this is feeling pretty good to me. And I actually I'm gonna see if I can just make a little bit more. Because it's nice to have a good amount for later in the test. Okay, so I'm just adding water and I'm just mixing it together. Okay, that feels pretty good to me. So then essentially we're just gonna go through this question by question. Okay, so the first one, we have added water. We have a little moldable, moist like putty little soil ball. Okay, does soil remain in a ball when squeezed? Yes. As you can see, it's in my nice little soil ball. Okay, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna place it between our thumb and forefinger, and we're going to push it into a ribbon. So we're trying to have it be uniformed thickness and width, and you keep making the ribbon until it breaks on its own. And we want to pay attention to how long that ribbon is when it starts to break. So I'm going to try and make it so you can see. And like I said, I am trying to push into a ribbon and it's breaking. Oh no. And it broke. it did indeed break. Okay. It did form a ribbon though. It wasn't very long, but it did. Okay. The next question. This next question is about how long the ribbon was when it started to. So mine was pretty short. So I'm going to go with the first one where it says, does soil make a weak ribbon less than 1 inch long before breaking? That was definitely what happened to me. To move on to our next slide. Okay, so remember, we were in this very first category here. So now what we do, toss that over. Okay. What? Oh, thank you. Okay, now we excessively wet a small pinch of soil in the palm and rub it with our forefinger. So get it really wet and rub it together. And what we are feeling for is, we are feeling for like the texture. How does it feel? Our questions that it's going to be asking is, does it feel very gritty? Does it feel very smooth? Or is it kind of in between and there's nothing that's really making it feel one way or another? So I am going to excessively wet. Okay. And I'm rubbing it together and I'm feeling it. So I'm trying to think of how it feels. Like it feels gritty, but I don't think it feels predominantly gritty, and it doesn't feel predominantly smooth. It honestly feels like kind of in between there. So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm going to go that it feels in between. So according to my little worksheet, oh, thank you. I'll do other. There we go.
You were in the trenches on this display.
I'm just reminiscing my childhood days of making mud pies right now. Okay. Okay. So like I said, I'm gonna go with it was neither very gritty nor very smooth. So in the middle, that would be loam. So that is our texture by feel. Now we are going to do what's called, okay, we're going to talk about a jar test. Another way to determine soil texture at home. So all you need is some soil, a mason jar, some tape, water, and a little bit of like soap or salt. So we're going to gather our materials. Very first thing we need is a mason jar. You want to have a lid. I do have a lid, it's just not on it right now. And you want it to be as much of a straight edged wall as possible. Oh, thank you. I'm going to clean up a little bit here. Okay, back to jar test. Okay, like I said, we want it to be as much of a straight edge jar as possible. Obviously, you can see on my mason jar, we do have a little bit of that curve here at the bottom. So in general, this isn't going to be as accurate as like a soil test that you send off to a lab. So there's just a couple things to keep in mind. Mine has a little bit of a curve, and when we're doing the measurements, it may be off a little bit, and that is okay. So how we do this, we get our jar. I personally like to add my tape to my jar before I start the process. We're going to use our tape to measure our layers at the end. So I like it when I already put the tape on. I can make sure it's straight. I don't have to fiddle with it and mess anything up. So that's what I do first. Then we are going to fill our jar with some soil. You can do about a third to a half. We just don't want to fill it up all the way because we are going to shake it. So we want to make sure that there is some room. Now, again, like with the feel, I like to try to get as much of like those big chunks of organic material out as possible. If there are some big rocks that are in there, try to get those out as well. Okay, now that we've got our jar and our soil and our tape, the best thing to do is add a few drops of a dish soap, or you can also do some salt. This is just going to help break apart those aggregates. So yeah, I don't have any with me at the moment, but that is okay. When you do this, just add, and you really just need a couple drops or a little pinch of salt. After you have done that, we're going to take our water and fill her up. Now this is gonna, it's gonna settle, it's gonna fill all those air pockets. But as long as it's a couple inches above the soil, that's a pretty good amount right there. Oh, the tape's kind of in the way. Let me turn this. Okay, so it's pretty full right now. Now that we've got our water, our soil, our dish soap or salt, then we're gonna put our lid on. And you want to make sure that this is on tight. Okay, it's very tight. Now what we do is shake. So we're really wanting to get everything to blend together as uniformly as possible. So we want to shake it for a while. Like you can do a couple minutes or so. So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to stop shaking, but you can definitely feel free to go ahead and shake some more. And then the next thing that you do is once it's all shooken up, you're going to set it on your counter and leave it. Don't touch it. I like to leave it for as long as possible. Like a good couple days is ideal. So I do have one that I did before. Now I do apologize. It got a little jostled as I was like driving over here and setting this up. But what will happen after a couple days is our layers are going to start settling and we're going to be able to pull out those layers of aggregate. So you probably can't see it too well just on the camera. I do have a picture, but what we're going to do is the sand is going to settle to the bottom because remember, those are the biggest pieces. And then we're going to have our silt, and then our clay is going to be on top, and then we'll have all that organic material. So once it settles, we're going to take our measurements, and then some of you may be asking, what is this little triangle that's over here on the other side of this slide? This is called the soil texture triangle. This is what we're going to use to determine what our soil texture is. As you can see, it's got all these different categories of soil texture types. So let me go ahead and move the next one. Okay, so this is after you have let it settle for a couple days. This is why I like to have the tape on here before. As you can see on this picture, so all of this at the top is just organic material. This small little section right here, that is middle. Okay. This in the middle is the silt, and then on the very bottom is the sand. Again, it may be a little hard to see on the picture because also like the jar is round and there's glare and everything. So it's really nice. It's fun to do it in person yourself because you can really see these layers settle out. So I think it's really fun. So once it's settled out, what I do is I take a little Sharpie, and where each of those layers are settled, I make a little dot. So then I can take measurements of it. So now we've got our layers divided out. So you want to grab your ruler, and what we're doing is we're measuring the amount, like the space of how long those layers are. And we're going to get the percentages based on the total amount of the soil we have in here. So as you can see, I have done all this math over here. The height of my sand layer was 1 inch. My silt was 1 inch and 1/8, and the clay was 3/16 of an inch. The total height of all of my layers was 2 inches, 2 and 5/16 inches. You can also do this in centimeters if you want. Okay, then after you've got the measurements, we're going to find the percentages. So you're going to take the height of the layer that we're doing, you're going to divide it by the total height of all the layers and times it by 100. It's going to get us our percentages. So here is all of my math if you would like to check it. But over here, I've got my percentages. So it was 43% sand, 49% silt, and 8% clay. So now comes the fun part of determining what our soil texture is. This is where that soil control comes into effect. So on each side, over here on the right is the percentage of silt. Over here on the bottom is the percent of sand. Over here on the left is the percent of clay. So what we do now is we take those percentages and you draw a line of where it is. So you can see here's sand. Our sand was 43%. This is my blue arrow. And of course you want to keep it parallel, to the other lines that the side that you're working on are, if that makes sense. So the blue arrow is my sand at 43%. My silt was 49%, so that's my green arrow here. And then my clay was 8%. So this is my red arrow here. So now we see where, like, the closest that they all intersect together, and that's what's going to tell us our soil texture. So as you can see, about where they intersect, it's kind of on the margin of a couple different ones. It does look like it's just over the line of loam. It's also pretty close to being in sandy loam or silt loam, but I think it's just enough over the line to classify it as loam. So what I think is super fun about this is when our texture by feel determination, I did determine it to be loam. So I think that's just really fun that those both lined up like that. Just goes to show you that even really simple tests that aren't super high tech can be pretty accurate. Again, it's not the most accurate test you could do. I haven't sent these off to like a soil lab to have the most exact confirmation, but they're pretty accurate. I did them at home, and I mean the jar test takes a couple days because you have to let it sit. But other than that, these just take a couple minutes, and you can very easily determine your soil texture. And that is really helpful information, especially if you are having some issues with some plants or anything like that in your garden. Okay. I do want to bring your attention to this link up here. So it's rocked, ROCKD.org. This is a really cool website. It has all of the soil types and history of that soil by region. So I think it's really cool to go look up. You just zoom in on where you live, click on, you can see it'll have the different like regions of soil. And I think it's really, really interesting to look at because the next topic that I wanted to bring up was like soil types in Utah and something to understand about our soil types and specifically in like the Salt Lake and Utah County, these valleys, is you have to look at the parent materials. So what is one of the biggest geological things that was in our area? That was Lake Bonneville. So that is what has created a lot of these deposits of clay and minerals and sand. You can really see like there's sand where the shores were and lots of clay where it was deeper. So what I think was really cool is going onto that website, rocked.org, when you kind of zoom out, you can like see the texture of the soil across the whole valley. So it's like you can really see where there was weathering of the parent materials that are the mountain ranges and where there's a lot of what's called alluvial fans. So it's kind of like a delta where it goes and then it fans out. And what's really interesting is you can see that on that website, and then it'll tell you all of the information about the type of soil that it is, if it is more clay, if it's more sand. And then what is then very fun is you can go to the mountain ranges and click on those. It'll tell you those parent materials. And I just think it's really fun because you can see what the materials were that got weathered down and broken down, deposited over time, and how that kind of lines up in our valley today. I think it's really fun to see that geological like time lapse almost, and how something that happened so very long ago we still have to take into account today when we're doing our gardening. So the other thing that happened because of Lake Bonneville is it kind of also led to that minimal natural organic material that is available here in Utah. So some of the most common soil types that we have, I think we mentioned it a lot. We have very clayey soils, very high clay. So that has really high water and nutrient retention, which is really great. But again, it can be readily compacted. It can be slow to drain. So sometimes you can have those like pockets of water that take a very long time to drain. Again, on the other end of the spectrum, we do have some very sandy soils. So they drain quickly, but they don't hold on to that water for very long. They don't hold on to those nutrients. And I think if anyone knows Todd in our diagnostics department, I think one of the funniest things he says, I don't know if it's actually that funny, but I think it's funny, is Sandy, our city Sandy, is called Sandy because it has sandy soils. So that's something I learned from him. I kind of think it's hilarious. So, but that's just me. I'm maybe a little nerdy. It's okay. I'll admit it. But anyways, that's sandy. Very sandy soils can benefit from some amendments. The other things that we have is very saline, which is very salty, and alkaline, which is that high pH. So that those, especially in combination, can really limit plant growth, and it can occur in soils of any texture. And again, that can have a really big impact on types of plants that can do well in your area if you have high salinity and high alkaline. Another thing that is very common in Utah is we have a very arid climate, which just means it's very dry. And so we kind of create this, it kind of creates a circular habit of it's very dry, we have very little rain, the soil gets dry, it gets hard, and then it just kind of keeps going. So then when it does rain, because the soil is so dry, it becomes what's called almost hydrophobic. So it almost repels the water. So then it doesn't take it in, and we just have erosion and compaction, and it kind of all just keeps going like that. So that's an arid climate. Now, among all of these things, one of the best things that you can do is to find plants that work in your environment and especially in your own microclimates in your own yard. If you have an area that is very clayey soil, so it's very moist, maybe it's under some shade, you're going to have a lot easier time of using plants that work better in those conditions rather than trying to change those conditions to fit other plants that you want to grow. So that is just one of the best things to do. That's why using natives are so nice, because those are plants that have evolved to live in our conditions. The thing about natives too is they're not all just drought tolerant desert plants. There's a very big variety in plants that are native to our region that cover a very vast set of circumstances. So there are native plants that do prefer that wet climate, that shaded climate, and then of course there are ones that do prefer hot, low water, full sun. So it's going to be much easier to do some investigation into your soil types, into your climates, your microclimates, kind of figure out what's going on there, and then see what plants will do well in those environments. Okay, something I do want to talk about a little bit. Let me move to the next slide. Okay, talk about the relationship between pH and nutrient availability. So, like we have mentioned, our soils can be very alkaline. That means they are high on the pH scale. I really like this graphic because it shows, I just think it does a good job of showing how pH can affect nutrient availability. There are some pHs that even if that nutrient is available, like there's a mass quantity of that nutrient in the soil, because of the pH, the plant can have a very hard time taking up that nutrient. So this is definitely something that we struggle with. In Utah, most of our soils are going to be between a 7.5 and an 8.5 pH. So we're looking right around here. For most of the things, it's still pretty good. We're really able to still take up nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, sulfur, calcium, magnesium. Those are all really great. But as you can see, as we get to iron, manganese, and boron, those really start to taper off. So those are the ones, even if you have gotten your soil tested and it shows that you have really good levels of iron, but if you have your pH as very high, your plants are still going to struggle to uptake those nutrients. So iron deficiency is probably one of the biggest nutrient deficiencies that we deal with in our area. It's one that I think we see a lot in the diagnostics department. This looks like your leaves are going to turn yellow, but the veins are going to stay green. That is a pretty good indicator that it's a iron deficiency. Now, manganese also looks similar to iron when you have a deficiency. And then boron it looks stunted, it looks like distorted, discoloration of new growth, particularly at those growing tips. So they can look a little different, but iron and manganese can look really similar. So this is kind of something to be aware of. If you are seeing some of those issues, definitely come in and chat with us. There are a couple of things that can be done. One of the biggest things with iron is using, it's called an EDDHA, or a chelated or chelated iron. I've heard it pronounced both ways. What that is, especially the EDDHA, it's still iron, but it's a different form of iron that is able to be uptaken even at those high pHs. So have no fear. There are some treatments that can be done if you are seeing some of those deficiencies happen in your soil. So yeah, if you feel like you're having some of that happen, definitely come on in and chat with us. We will talk about different options that are available to you. And also, spring is going to be one of the best times to do some of these treatments because the plants are still waking up. So they are doing a lot more of, it's called like the pull of the water from the roots all the way up through the tree itself. As we get hotter and more into the season, that kind of goes down a little bit. So they have, the vacuum is the strongest right now. So now is the best time for treatments, because you have just a much higher probability of more of that nutrient getting pulled all the way through the tree as possible. The other thing, particularly when it comes to iron deficiencies, iron is what's called a non-relocatable nutrient. I believe that's the correct term for it. So something like nitrogen can flow pretty freely through the plant, but iron cannot. So once it shows deficient, even if you do a treatment for it, that leaf itself will not get better. The new leaves that grow are what's going to get better. So that's kind of a little bit about that nutrient availability with our high pH soils. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to pull this up while I kind of talk about a couple other things. Just say low battery. So I'll go as fast as I can. Okay, we're going to go a little fast and kind of finish up. If I miss anything, I'll add it in later, but we are still continuing to have just a few little technical issues. Again, I'm so sorry, but thank you for learning with us as we do this. So let's talk about some threats that we face in Utah with our soil. I think we've talked about erosion. So that's like wind and water. Again, that's like the arid nature of our soils. When it's so dry and exposed, again, we don't have that vegetation layer. Our soil is very exposed, so it can be very easily eroded through wind and rain. Another thing that can kind of disrupt that or make it more prone to the erosion is tilling. So tilling is something that can really disrupt that soil texture and just make it that much more exposed. So a very good example of this is the Dust Bowl. That is an example where there was so much like agriculture, so much tilling, everything just got exposed, and then there was nothing holding that soil down, so then it just created the Dust Bowl. Another thing that we have talked about is compaction. This can happen from overgrazing if it is in an agricultural area, heavy machinery. Again, the compaction can really disrupt that really good root growth. It's really hard to get through it when it is so compacted. Something we have touched on a little bit is also that salt accumulation. Something that can also contribute to salt accumulation is the use of secondary water. So, secondary water is untreated and unfiltered water that is used for irrigating lawns and landscapes, and it is not potable. So, depending on the source of your secondary water, can kind of determine any potential problems that are going to come along with that. For most of us in like Southern Salt Lake and Utah County, the secondary water comes from Utah Lake, which is very high in salinity. So if you're using secondary water, that can kind of just lead to salt accumulation over time, and that can really affect your plants. So we have compiled a pretty extensive list that talks about plants that can do a little bit better with secondary. So we do have some lists that talk about plants that are good for secondary water. Another thing that can significantly impact our soil ecosystems is wide herbicide use. So this can lead to potentially some pretty negative effects. Herbicides, when they're designed for like a really broad application, it can really affect our soil structure, the microbial life in the soil, and nutrient cycling. And something like soil sterilant, it can have residual effects in the soil for years. So it just really, when you're using something to kill something and it's a very wide application, it's also going to kill the good things. I feel like it's kind of like when you're on an antibiotic. A lot of people will tell you to take a probiotic because it's just kind of going after everything. So it can really create that imbalance of microbial life in your soil. They can be a useful tool, but it shouldn't be the first thing that we reach for. Instead, we really like to use an IPM approach to use that as a hierarchy for making decisions. So this is what is on the screen. This is the IPM pyramid. So we kind of start at the bottom, work our way up. Start with cultural. That's just kind of about good planting habits, good spacing, good watering habits. Physical/mechanical, that's like hand weeding, using insect traps, using barriers. Then we can get into biological, which is using like natural predators in the area, either increasing their trying to entice them more, or by like releasing. And then the idea is if you go through all of these things and you're still having really big issues, maybe that's when you start to look into chemical options. And even in the chemical options, there are different levels, because there are things that are just like a repellent or an oil that could potentially really help your problem before moving to a more conventional pesticide. So that is about IPM. We are actually going to be talking about like pests and beneficial insects in our next live stream that's in 2 weeks. So if you're interested in that, take a look on our social media, and we've got links to that as well. And I promise to have my tech issues resolved by then. Pinky promise. Okay, I want to talk about things we can do to improve our soil. So one of the biggest things, and this is something that can help if you have sandy or clay soil, is adding organic matter. So like we mentioned, we don't have much of that horizon in Utah, but we can kind of try to build a little bit of one over time when we add organic matter regularly. So organic matter in clay is going to help with drainage. In sandy, it's going to help with nutrient and water retention. So I think it's really fun that the same thing can help different ranges of soil. Organic matter is just anything that's going to decompose. So yard waste, grass clippings, kitchen scraps, newspaper, cardboard, like anything like that is going to be great. And of course, you can also just, if you want to purchase a compost, that is wonderful as well. But there are things you can use in your own backyard kind of before you go out and make some purchases. Some other big things are using a cover crop. I think we have some really good articles about this that we put out last fall. Last fall, we made our own cover crop blend that was specifically cultivated for our area in Utah. So cover crop is something, it's literally a crop that you plant, and the idea behind it is it's covering the soil so that water and wind is not eroding it. The roots are holding that soil together, creating more texture, creating more air pockets. And the idea behind it is before it goes to flower, you terminate it, so you cut it down, and then you kind of gently mix in that organic material into your soil before you plant again. Now, the type of cover crop you use can also be really helpful because there are cover crops that utilize a legume, and legumes have nitrogen fixing nodules on their roots. So using something like that can also help with your nutrients even more. So I love cover crops. I think they're super great. If you've never used one before, take a look at some of our articles and come on in and talk to us. I think they are great and I'd love to see them being used more. Another thing that can help improve is mulching. This is going to help retain moisture, it reduces weeds, reduces erosion because there's something covering that soil. It's not just exposed. So it can really help keep all of that in. The last thing that I want to talk about is some general sustainable soil practices. We really need to support that soil microbiome. If we support the soil first, the soil will support the soil that is just on the earth. So I think it's really important to take care of it so that we can, I mean, even yes, have pretty plants that grow and make us feel nice, but also food and maybe some grass and shade. So our soil is very important. In case you haven't noticed. So some sustainable practices: crop rotation. That's going to prevent nutrient depletion and prevent pest population buildup in areas. We talked about minimal tillage or no till. That helps reduce erosion, reduce compaction. We just talked about cover crops. You can use water efficient gardening. So something like a drip irrigation, that is something that slowly waters directly at the soil line. So you're going to have less water runoff, and it's also going to water your plants a little bit better because that water is slowly infiltrating the soil. So it's much more likely to go down to the roots of that plant directly and give it a nice deep soak. There is also xeriscaping, and also if you're looking at landscaping, you can also think about grouping plants together that have similar water needs. So you've got your little group over here that needs less water and more and more, so you're not just watering everything the same. You can water this area a little bit less, and maybe you need to water that one a little bit more. We again also mentioned mulching, adding organic material. Also, using material from your own yard is really nice because you're taking those nutrients that were used to build all those plants that you had, and you're returning it directly